There are things happening, global things happening. Trump is overseas today, just signed a big $600 billion deal with Saudi Arabia, which is fine because that's like pocket change for those daggone people. Anyway, it's a good thing. And we have, I don't want to call it a trade deal with China. We have a 90-day pause on hostilities with China. But let's ask Stephen Mosher about this because he knows a lot more about all this stuff than I ever will. Joining me now, Stephen Mosher, president of the Population Research Institute. Okay, Stephen, we got a 90-day pause on tariffs with China, and they're going to pause on their tariffs with us. But Trump even said the larger structural issues still remain in place. What's going on?
Well, what's going on is first of all, before the delegation, Scott Bessant and Greer left for Switzerland, Trump said that, the tariff rate should be around 80%, but it's up to Bessant. So the Chinese were already worried that they were going to get hit with permanent 80% tariffs. And so they agreed to our demands. What were our demands? Well, first of all, the Trump tariffs reminded China of who's in charge, right? Many nations reached out immediately. China delayed, remaining defiant for 2 weeks while factories shut down and urban unemployment skyrocketed. But they finally came around. Look, thousands of Chinese businesses have shuttered and failed every day over the last 2 weeks. This last week, I checked Shenzhen and Zhejiang, those two big export centers. 1,800 factories closed down just in the last week alone. The official purchasing managers index is falling sharply. And if the official one is falling, you know that the real numbers must be really, really bad. Now, here's what China did going into the negotiations. They have now said, well, we were always willing to talk to America about the trade imbalance, but the Biden administration had no interest in holding talks. Well, maybe they didn't because the big guy was in China's pay, and Biden had no interest in enforcing the first Trump deal, which was back in January of 2020. That was a pretty good deal. This one's going to be even better. They have a 90-day pause in which to think very clearly about two things. One is stopping the fentanyl trade. And I think people should be angry about the fentanyl trade, very angry.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about that fentanyl trade, Stephen. And China's the one responsible for it in the end, right?
Oh, absolutely. And we've known that for years. China, the Chinese Communist Party, knows exactly where the factories are that are producing the fentanyl and the fentanyl precursors. They working with the Mexican cartels because they're laundering the money through Chinese banks. That's how the money gets back into the real economy and out of the black economy. They know where the labs are in British Columbia. The biggest lab is in British Columbia, by the way, not in Mexico. They know where the labs are in northern Mexico. And they could have stopped 5 years ago, the fentanyl trade. Instead, they preferred to kill 80,000 Americans a year in a kind of chemical weapons attack on the United States. And the thing that makes me furious is even before Scott Bessant went to Switzerland, the Chinese said, if you lower the tariffs, we'll stop the fentanyl trade. Well, that's a tacit admission that they could have stopped it at any point in time, but they preferred to let it continue to kill Americans and make billions of dollars in profits. And I think every American should be angry at the fact that China not only released COVID on the world, which is a biological weapons attack, it also has been releasing fentanyl on the United States, which is chemical weapons attack. So I think that's at the top of Trump's list here. And we're going to see in the next 90 days if China shuts down those fentanyl factories, and better yet, if they cooperate and tell us where the cartels are, where the labs are, so we can take them out and shut them down permanently. That would be a big deal. I mean, you can talk about the billions of dollars in the trade deficit, but to my mind, the lives of 80,000 Americans are our top priority. Let's save those lives first.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Stephen, can you explain to me why it's a big deal that a bunch of factories closed in China? Now, if you said that happened in Baton Rouge, I would say it's a big deal. But when I think about China, I think about this one-party control dictatorship. What are they worried about if some Chinese peasants are out of work? Why does it matter?
Well, it matters because there are going to be millions of Chinese peasants out of work. And the thing is, Jesse, they're no longer peasants. You see, their grandparents were peasants when they came to the cities in the 1980s and worked in the factories. And then they would go home during the holidays, and they had soft rice paddy to land on if they were unemployed. Their parents came to work in the cities and then sent these kids back to the villages to be taken care of by their grandparents 20 years ago. That's all gone now. The villages have emptied out. Those millions of unemployed workers have no soft rice paddy to land on. They have no home villages to go back to in many cases. And there are millions of them. 10 million already right now, heading to 20 million. Probably, if the tariffs had stayed in place, it would be 30 or 40 million unemployed. And not just unemployed throughout the length and breadth of China, unemployed in all of the coastal cities that specialize in export to the United States. That would be a huge concentration of unemployed and hungry people who were angry at the Chinese Communist Party for failing to manage relations with the United States better. And people need to understand that we control the world economy and the Chinese economy in this sense. The Chinese economy only has one leg to stand on. The property sector is gone. The banks are shuttering. They're going bankrupt. The big property investors have already gone bankrupt, like Evergrande. The people are diminishing in number. They're getting older and dying. China's population is actually shrinking. The consumer economy is shrinking. Xi Jinping made the mistake. The dictator of China made the mistake, I think, a few weeks ago of telling the Chinese people that they better be prepared to eat bitterness. What does eat bitterness mean in Chinese? Well, it reminds the Chinese people of the Great Leap Forward famine in the early 1960s, when people were eating bitterness. They were eating grasses, grass seeds, and tree bark to try to stay alive. And 50 million didn't. They died. There's already talk of rationing food in China right now. So massive unrest, I think, on a scale that puts the Tiananmen demonstrations back in 1989, makes them look minuscule in comparison. We had millions of people in the streets of Beijing, but we will have millions of people in the streets of not just Beijing this time, but in Shanghai, in Guangzhou, in all of the other cities along the Chinese coast. And I think the Chinese Communist Party is going to have its hand full in dealing with the unrest that will come if the tariffs, the high tariffs, stayed in place. So they have 90 days to think about what they're going to do. And I think what they're going to do is they're going to stop the fentanyl trade, and they're going to try to make nice for a while. Now, I don't trust the Chinese Communist Party. They violated every agreement they've ever signed. I mean, the nuclear non-proliferation agreement violated. They sent nukes to Pakistan, which is why we have a nuclear power confrontation, in between India and Pakistan today. Everything they've promised to do, from the promise of Xi Jinping in the Rose Garden back in 2016, where he promised Obama that he would stop the cyber attacks. Of course, the cyber attacks continued. They intensified. So all of these things that the Chinese government says, you can't take at face value. We have to look at what they do, and we will have a 3-month period to look at what they do now.
Well, fingers crossed. Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate you, sir. I would thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, but I know how brilliant it is, and I know you love it here. So subscribe and watch. We're going to start really ramping things up and putting some funny stuff, some interesting stuff out there, some collaborations. Either way, my YouTube channel is officially the place to be. So stick around.